Okay, so we're just going to jump straight into the message, and the title of my message today is Why Integrity? So it's week 6 of our Sermon on the Mount series, and the passage that we'll be looking at today is from Matthew chapter 5, verse 33 to 37. And it says, "Again, you have heard that it was said to those who lived long ago, don't make a false solemn pledge, but you should follow through on what you have pledged to the Lord. But I say to you that you must not pledge at all. You must not pledge by heaven because it's God's throne. You must not pledge by the earth because it's God's footstool. You must not pledge by Jerusalem because it's the city of the great king. And you must not pledge by your head because you can't turn one hair white or black. Let your yes mean yes and your no mean no. Anything more than this comes from the evil one." So let your yes mean yes and your no mean no. So no one in this room can attest that your yes is always a yes and your no is always a no. Yes? Yes. It's correct. It's correct. It's not a trick question. Okay, so we have all broken promises before, said yes to something but never actually following through. Don't look at your neighbor right now. So there are situations where it's a big deal to break a promise. For example, a vow made in a marriage, breaking a contract you signed for, or at work, not completing an important deadline you have committed to deliver. But most of the time, we find ourselves in smaller situations that test whether we are people of our word. For example, not showing up for something you promised to do, lying to get out of a responsibility, flicking out on friends, where it seems sort of fine because the consequences are not severe, where even if we disappoint someone, a friend, we can shrug it off like it's not a big deal, because our friends will still love us tomorrow. Oh, okay. But here, Jesus teaches us to be people of our word. It's important because our integrity matters to God. And to give context to this passage we just read, Jesus was confronting the way people took oaths back in his time. So what were these oaths that Jews took exactly? Well, since the time of Leviticus, Israel had a practice called taking oaths, which were an important part of conducting life, business, and relationships in community. Oaths at one point in time were as binding as the legal contracts we have today. They guarantee a promise. So instead of a contract being signed, oaths were being used between persons to seal agreements and settle disputes. It was so culturally binding that people could go to Israel's judges and leaders to demand redress for what was promised to them. So they were mostly verbal. And then at one point, there are rituals where someone would give a piece of clothing, for example, their right sandal, or for us, maybe our Nikes or Jordans, as a symbol that they are committed to the deal. However, over time, the value of being people of your word got watered down. And religious leaders had also complicated the practice. So later in Matthew 23, Jesus talks about how ridiculous the rules about oath had become. So it says here in the verse, "How terrible it will be for you blind guides to say, if people swear by the temple, it's nothing. But if people swear by the gold in the temple, they are obligated to do what they swore. You foolish and blind people, which is greater, the gold or the temple that makes the gold holy? You say if people swear by the altar, it's nothing. But if they swear by the gift on the altar, they are obligated to do what they swore. You blind people, which is greater, the gift or the altar that makes the gift holy?" So can you imagine, one teaching actually went, if you swore by the temple or the altar, you can get out of keeping your word. However, the same teaching went, but if you swore by the gold in the temple or the gift on the altar, you are going to have to keep the oath. So that was what religion and culture had become. Once upon a time, in God's law, it was something that was positive. It was a means to seal an agreement with God and people. And his point was honesty, integrity, faithfulness, and commitment. But now, in Jesus' time, religious leaders had created loopholes. So much so that oaths have become reduced to exaggeration, a way to just impress others with empty promises. And what was worse is that in Jesus' time, some Pharisees were rewriting these oath laws to manipulate people for self-advantage. So often they would swear by the temple when bargaining with the poor. When people came to the temple, they weren't allowed to bring their own sacrifices. They had to buy one from the temple's merchants. Religious leaders who were in cahoots with the merchants would jack up the price, and when the poor tried to get the price lowered, the religious leaders would swear by the temple that they couldn't lower it. So it's sort of like a salesman going, "Friend, this is really the best price already. I swear to you, any lower, I will lose money." And then 1 week later, you'll find someone offering the same thing for half the price. So the merchants in the temple will go, "I swear by the temple, this is the best price. Don't you want to offer God an acceptable sacrifice?" And then when the poor had to borrow money or owe a debt for their sacrifice, they would then make the poor swear by the gold in the temple or the gift on the altar to repay. Which is why Jesus at some point got so angry, he chased out the moneylenders and merchants from God's house. Of course, fast forward 2,000 years later, we no longer swear by the temple or make oaths as a sign of promise. We have things like legal contracts to protect ourselves and the other party. However, lack of integrity is still a problem. Today, people break contracts and our promises pretty easily. We compromise our integrity if it will benefit us versus being honest. We can manipulate truth, spin truth, or simply lie for our own advantage. And especially with the world of social media, we can get away with anything nowadays because anyone's opinion can be masked as the truth. So take a step back, pause, and really consider, are we honest, truthful, and faithful people? Because I think that's the point of Jesus' teaching here. So integrity means the quality of being honest and having strong moral principles, undivided internal consistency. Jesus is not pinpointing which of the Pharisees' strange rules to follow. I also don't think he's literally forbidding us to take oaths. What Jesus is doing is telling us to live up to a greater standard of integrity with our lives, that even without oaths or promises, we must simply be people of our word. Yes is yes, no is no. So my first point for you today is integrity helps you become your best self. And in Matthew 5 verse 33, it says, "Again, you have heard that it was said to those who lived long ago, don't make a false solemn pledge, but you should follow through on what you have pledged." And the first thing I want to point out is that the starting point of integrity is being your authentic self. Jesus says, don't make a false solemn pledge. I know this seems to be only talking about the words that we say, don't be false about it, but I also think false words tend to come out of a false self. Whether we are deliberately lying to get someone to get what we want, or we are pretending to be someone we are not because we want acceptance. So each of us needs to dig deep and ask ourselves, who is the authentic best self that we want to be? First and foremost, I hope that you, like me, want to be a genuinely good and sincere person. I hope your best self isn't a manipulative, abusive sociopath or psychopath. Anybody here, your best authentic self is a narcissist? Raise your hand. Okay, we are safe. Okay, so if you're in your right mind, all of us here wants to be a good and sincere person. So sincere is a word evolved from a Latin word which is sincera, and that means without wax. And in ancient Rome, there was a term called waxing used at a time by artists who were not the finest of sculptors. They will layer a clear wax over the sculpture which will smooth the marble and hide the cracks, imperfections, and pits of the marble. It will make the sculpture look perfect, free of imperfections, with a flawless surface. To the eye, it appeared smooth, but beneath the surface, it was false and inferior. So if anyone wanted an authentic statue of fine quality, carved by someone who took pride in their workmanship, they would go to the artisan's marketplace in Rome and look for booths bearing a sign with the word sincera, which meant that you were getting the real thing. No flaws, no cover-ups, no shitty deals, sincere. Are you a person that's sincere? If you were to turn to a friend next to you today and ask them about yourself, would they say that you are a sincere person? Someone who doesn't have serious flaws in your character. Oh, sorry. Okay, someone who is honest and doesn't hide the truth or cover up your mistakes. someone who isn't shady? Because to me, that is the most fundamental starting point of integrity. Not that you're perfect, but that you have a sincere, good self. We have all met someone who lacks genuine sincerity, whether it's a colleague at work who is two-faced, says one thing and does another, and worse yet is two-faced and backstabs you. Or at school, someone that is your friend but always backs out on every single commitment they have made, be it showing up for a project or just being there for you. Or people who are never interested in knowing more about your life, opinions, or feelings. They only want to talk about their own problems and their feelings. These people are not sincere, and we need to stay far away from them because they have no basic integrity in their character. But beyond that, assuming that all of us are sincere people, we then want to be people who know who we are. Because while some people can be false intentionally, most of us here tend to be false unintentionally. When we don't know who we are, what our values and what is important to us, these are the moments we promise what we can't deliver. We commit things we don't want. We make compromises because we are afraid. We give in to peer pressure and do things that violate our conscience and convictions. And knowing ourselves can really be a journey. It requires us to look inward and to search deep within ourselves. I too am in a journey of figuring out myself, and with that comes a lot of confusing thoughts at times. I still struggle with having confidence from time to time, which I'm sure we can all relate to that. Sometimes not knowing when to stand up for myself, I will easily give in to please others or to meet other people's expectations. So in my previous job, when I first started working, there was once where there was an open pitch opportunity for designers to take part, and where we have to submit our ideas and proposals to win a project. When I first heard it, I was like, wow, it sounds pretty cool. I've not done anything like this, but I will be interested in trying. It wasn't something I was really familiar with doing, and in order to win or to even submit a relatively good idea, I would have to do quite a bit of research and learning on my own. But as time passed, more and more people started chiming in their thoughts about this pitch. Colleagues will go, this is a great opportunity, but I'm sure it'll be hard to win. More experienced designers who have more experience and skills than me will comment and say things like, I don't think I will or want to do it. People will comment and tell me, not in an intentionally demeaning way, but they will say, oh, I didn't think this was something that you would like or be great at doing. I thought you'd be better at doing this and that instead. And so even though I was interested in trying out that project initially, and I believe I would have been able to submit a decent proposal then, if I may say so myself, I too started to dismiss the idea that I should even try. It wasn't anything major, but when I look back and reflected, it was a point in my life when I was really, really swayed by every single comment that I heard, what people would tell me about me. Great if it's something good and constructive, but most of the times allowing the negative words to get to me the most. You see, when you're in that position, you can really be unsure of when to draw your boundaries or when to say no to things or to people. Or like me, you will give up opportunities in life or at work simply because you have no confidence that you will be able to live up to it, or always assuming someone else will do a better job than you. But you know, it's always easier to back out before you attempt anything. Before you can fail, you tell yourself, this is not for you. Before someone can tell you that you're bad at it, you dismiss it within yourselves first. But today, I want to encourage everyone here to step out, to just try. Find a community of friends that you can trust in, or if not here at TiVo, you can find amazing friends that will cheer you on. But even when we search and dig deep within ourselves, it is never easier or clearer without hearing what your friends and other people have to say. Our perception of ourselves can sometimes be very wrong from who we really are. Sometimes we all need a friend to tell us, why do you think of yourself this way? You are much more than that. And sometimes we also need a friend to tell us, in a kind way, okay, maybe that's a little bit too self-absorbed. And for myself, I'm thankful to have PC, my leaders, and my friends that are always there to affirm who I am, but also tell me the truth sometimes if I'm just being emo. So whether is it your insecurities or your ego that could be holding you back, you need to slowly let go of that today. The fact of the matter is our integrity has little to do with people or situations we find ourselves in. Our integrity has to do with us. When we don't live truly or honestly, we end up miserable. We get into relationships or keep relationships we know we shouldn't. We even end up buying this or that because advertisements say so. Compromises, no matter how small we tell ourselves they are, change our souls. And we lose something of ourselves. Each of us has to make two important choices about our lives. Who are we going to be in our values, and who are we going to be in our calling? Because that is the path to our authentic self. Now, don't confuse authenticity with individuality. We are all special and unique, but being special and unique should not be selfish or self-preserving. Jesus may have started with talking about being your authentic self, but in the second half of verse 33, he attaches it to our follow-through. It says here, again, you have heard that it was said to those who lived long ago, don't make a false solemn pledge, but you should follow through on what you have pledged. This means integrity is never just about you. It's also about who you are towards other people. A person who knows their authentic self is someone who also takes their responsibility towards others seriously. I don't know about you, but I'm so tired of people who only think of themselves, but not of their responsibility towards others. I'm sure you know someone like that, maybe at work, at school, or at home. Integrity is being reliable. Integrity is about being true to ourselves, but also being responsible to others. We do our best to find ourselves and be our real self, to speak and commit from an authentic place, but then the next step is our follow-through. So James E. Faust was an American religious leader and civil rights lawyer and politician, and one of the famous quotes from him goes, "Honesty is more than not lying. It is truth-telling, truth-speaking, truth-living, and truth-loving." We are called to be truthful with who we are and truthful in how we relate to people. If you turn to your friend again and ask them if you are a good friend, will they say yes? Will they hesitate because we Singaporeans are bad at saying no? Will we say yes, but you can do better? Do you know who you are, and does your behavior match your beliefs? If it doesn't, then it's time to assess our beliefs and behavior. If it doesn't, then it's also time to let others speak into our integrity. Which leads me to my next point. Integrity must be motivated by love. We are still in Sermon on the Mount, yeah? Yes. So the whole point of what Jesus is teaching us is the law of love. That love is why we live with higher standards, including a standard of integrity. But nowadays, the world's definition seems to be not the law of love towards others, but the law of self-love. Everything is about my authentic self, my calling, my life, my individual happiness. And when things don't go my way or flow with what my beliefs are, I'm going to call you out. Except the same people who like to call people out, whether it's social media or their own friends, they don't like it when other people call them out. This is not integrity, this is double standards. A heavier sentence on others, a lighter standard on yourself. But your integrity cannot just be about you. You cannot expect others to give you space to be your authentic self and then not give other people space to have the same. We need to have integrity with love, not selfishness. It is possible to love others the way we love ourselves. Now, this doesn't mean that we stop being honest with each other, with a friend who needs to hear a painful truth or advice from us. But it means that when we make a decision of what to say to someone, when to say it, and how we say it, the integrity, honesty, and sincerity needs to be done in love. I found an amazing article in Harvard Business Review called "What Great Listeners Actually Do." So most people will think that being a good friend comes down to doing these three things. So firstly, not talking when others are speaking. Secondly, letting others know you're listening through your facial expressions and verbal sounds like Or thirdly, being able to reflect what others have said to them. Recent research, however, suggests that these behaviors actually fall far short. And what's really needed are the following. So firstly, good listeners actively ask discovery questions. Contrary to popular belief, being a good friend is not just a one-way speaker versus listener session. Good listening was actually consistently seen as a two-way dialogue. But the best listeners were those who periodically asked questions to help the other person discover insights about themselves. Questions that constructively challenge old assumptions. So if you're still someone who demands people to only listen to you non-stop, who goes, "You're not a good friend if you don't sit there and let me rant," I think it's time to change your definition of best friend. Good friends ask questions to understand us, but they also ask questions to help us become our better self. And secondly, good listeners build a person's self-esteem. They do their best to make the conversation a positive experience for the other person, which incidentally doesn't happen when the listener is passive or, for that matter, overly critical. Good listeners make the other person feel supported and convey confidence in them. They create a safe environment in which issues and differences could be discussed openly. And thirdly, good listeners engage in cooperative conversation. In the best interactions, feedback flows smoothly in both directions, with neither party becoming defensive about comments the other made. In contrast, poor listeners were seen as competitive, as listening only to identify errors in reasoning or logic, using their silence as a chance to prepare the next response. Who's got a friend like that? That might make you an excellent debater, but it doesn't make you a good listener. And lastly, good listeners tend to make suggestions. So being a good friend is not saying nothing. Being a good friend is also giving feedback. But feedback in a way that others will accept and be open to alternative paths to consider. So it's not that we cannot be honest, it's the spirit and the skill that you use. Are you a critical know-it-all doling out your advice? Or are you someone who loves your friend enough to say things in a way that they can receive it? Being a good friend is not being a sponge for drama, wrong attitude, and bad behavior. Instead, you are supposed to come with your integrity but motivated by love. And when you do that, when you are a great listener, what these findings shows is that good listeners are like trampolines. Someone whom you can bounce ideas off of. So rather than absorbing your ideas and energy, they amplify, energize, and clarify your thinking. They make you feel better, not merely passively absorbing, but by actively supporting. This lets you gain energy and height, just like someone jumping on a trampoline, which is really cool. And I want to share an amazing story about valuing others and listening well, and that's a story about the brand Campbell, a brand that we may all be very familiar with. So when Douglas Conant first took over as the CEO of Campbell Soup Company in 2001, the company had just lost half of its market share, that sales were declining, and the organization was reeling from a series of layoffs of their employees. The environment was so toxic that a Gallup manager described employee engagement as among the worst he has seen in a Fortune 500 company. So one of the first things Douglas Conant did was to address the dysfunctional, low-performance environment and to visibly set expectations for how he intended to create a more civil culture built on respect. He did this immediately by working with his executive leadership team to create the Campbell Promise, which meant Campbell valuing people, people valuing Campbell. He wanted to express the idea that Campbell was consciously putting people first. So to start, Douglas Conant and colleagues made Inspire Trust as their number one leadership competency. They made it specific and clear to managers that they expected to build trust with employees by honoring them and valuing them while living out the Campbell Promise. Next, they identified practices and processes to support this expectation. One such practice is called declaring yourself. So on the first hour of the first day, he works with a direct report. He tells them exactly how he intends to lead, what he values, his thoughts on his industry, and his work and communication style. This method removes the mystery from working relationships and increases transparency and accountability. This practice is also reciprocal. So at a subsequent meeting, he always invites the other person to share their own personal philosophy, beliefs, and work style. So this practice shows employees that working relationships are important and worthy of time and energy, and that mutual understanding is valued in the work environment. So Douglas Conner began calling the daily interactions he had with his employees touchpoint. He developed a 4-step process for dealing with them in the most respectful and productive way, which is listen, frame, advance, and help. He first listens to the other party, frames what they are saying to demonstrate understanding, leverages his expertise to help advance the issue, and finally asks, how can I help? To really motivate himself and the other leaders to be civil and respectful, he held himself and others accountable. So at Campbell, they will survey the organization every year to see how leaders were performing against their expectation. If the evaluations revealed leaders were falling short, the expectation was explicitly reinforced. And in the early years of the Turnaround Initiative, hundreds of the top 350 senior leaders who could not or would not demonstrate their willingness to adapt to the approach were let go or transition to other roles. Wow. So replacing those leaders with people who were committed to a more civil approach changed the culture and was instrumental in helping the company becoming who they are today. Wow, and this all began with a simple deliberation of being open and transparent, but also learning to put people first. So guys, our integrity cannot just be about us. And my last point for you today is our integrity should bring us peace. So our integrity should bring us peace towards who we truly are and who we are working to become. Sometimes the greatest lie that we can tell is a lie to ourselves. It is self-deception. It blinds us from seeing who we really are and therefore hinders us from becoming and growing into who we should be. Our integrity to others should also bring mutual peace. Knowing that you have both been true to each other, this builds up our relationship with others. That's how we can see the relationship in the way that it is without any filter. There is no need to be someone that you are not in the relationship or to withhold anything from the other person. So there's a short story that I really love, and it's about a boy with marbles and a girl with sweets. So there was once a boy who had a great collection of marbles and a girl with her collection of sweets. Each looked at what the other had and was envious. So they agreed on an exchange, the boy to give the girl his marbles and the girl to give the boy sweets. The boy kept the biggest and the particular attractive marble aside and gave the rest to the girl. The girl gave him all her sweets as she had promised. That night, the girl went off to a pleasant sleep, but the boy couldn't sleep as he kept wondering if the girl had hidden some sweets from him the way he had hidden his best marble. You see, it's such a simple story, but it really tells a lot of how we can be sometimes in our relationship with others. Don't allow yourself to hold any of your marbles back from another person. If you're not feeling a connection with the people whom you're around with, perhaps sometimes you can resolve it starting with yourself. The way we relate in relationships and life can sometimes be the way we respond to relationship and life internally. Integrity is one of the most important elements in every single relationship we have in our life, because that's how we build trust. Trust, in its most basic sense, is placing confidence in another person and in return, them placing confidence in you. In Brené Brown's book, Daring Greatly, she shares the story of her young daughter losing trust in her best friends and the subsequent decision to never trust anyone again. Brené Brown uses the analogy of a marble jar to help her daughter understand how trust is built. So as people share stories about themselves, marbles are added to their trust jar. The more stories they share and the deeper those stories are, the more marbles you're able to add to their jar. And it is easy to trust someone whose jar is overflowing. Trust is about give and take over a period of time. Give a little to get a little. If you're brave, generous, and honest in your actions, people will start to trust you in return. It's the small steps that get you there. Trust is not some big, monumental, life-altering action. Trust is a jar of marbles. And integrity is a way of life, not just a behavior. And the question we need to ask ourselves today is, what are we doing to fill other people's jars? So as I was preparing for this message, honestly, this is one challenging topic to write about. There's really no way to spin it around other than to be a person of integrity. Don't be inconsistent with your words and thoughts. Don't be quick to speak. Be slow to listen. Honor your words and follow through with your promises. I could keep going on and on, but you may not want me to. We all love to hear encouraging words. I definitely do. But when it comes to challenging ourselves to a higher standard of truth and living, there is always a lot of pushback. Is this really what God meant? What about this? What about that? There are too many rules. This is too serious. Honestly speaking, we could live without these expectations and still be fine. But I want you to live today knowing that Jesus' intention is not for us to struggle with an expectation or to feel bad for falling below the line. He wants us to be in peace in our relationship with Him and to just keep doing our best to align with what's good for us. But we must avoid both the negative approach of antinomianism, or simply cheap grace, to say that we want to live life freely as it is, to be who we are, say what we want without our care because of God's grace. Or legalism or righteous works, where we are so tied down by rules and laws, we only value doing what is right and abandoning all else, our relationships and people. Just like the Pharisees who were so fixated on the law, who's in, who's out, who's right, and who's wrong. There were in fact many examples of the Pharisees questioning Jesus in the Bible, or them laying down a statement for the sake of excluding people in the community. In Mark chapter 3, verse 1 to 6, it says, Jesus returned to the synagogue. A man with a withered hand was there. Wanting to bring charges against Jesus, they were watching Jesus closely to see if he would heal on the Sabbath. He, who is Jesus, said to the man with the withered hand, "Step up where people can see you." Then he said to them, "Is it legal on the Sabbath to do good or to do evil, to save life or to kill?" But they said nothing. Looking around at them with anger, deeply grieved at their unyielding hearts, he said to the man, "Stretch out your hand." So he did, and his hand was made healthy. At that, the Pharisees got together with the supporters of Herod to plan how to destroy Jesus. The Pharisees were so caught up with bringing charges against Jesus that they were waiting and they were watching and finding a moment to call him out, neglecting the most important part, which is the man who was needing a healing. Jesus' word is neither to merely show us our sin or a need for a savior, nor is it a list of rules to obey in Christ's kingdom. Rather, it is a message that inspires us to be our best, for ourselves and for others. I love how Jesus simply summarizes it down to one-liner. Let your yes mean yes, and your no mean no. Not a 20 pages long laws, but simply let your yes mean yes, and your no mean no. Be truthful, live out being the best you, build your integrity on love, and be in peace, trusting that you can grow yourself and your relationships truthfully and authentically. And that's all I have for you today.